How's it going, everyone? So before we dive into the episode, I really want to say thank you to everyone that is listening in, that's tuning in, that's enjoying this content and getting value from it. I really love that. That's why I do it. But there's a huge amount of you that are listening that are not subscribed, not following the podcast. And I really want to encourage you to please follow and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening or viewing this on. It really helps out the podcast. It helps out the algorithm. It helps more people hear this content that you already find helpful and that they hopefully will as well. So if you go ahead and subscribe or follow the podcast on any platform that you're listening on, and please share it with your friends, that'll be great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Let's get into the episode. How's it going, Grant? It's great to finally get you on the podcast. We've been planning this thing for a while, and I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Joe. It's great to be here. So I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Grant, why don't you take me back to when you started, or when you started to kind of think maybe IT's for me? What made you start to think that way? What made you start to go down the IT path?
It's a good question and funny one. So I grew up playing baseball. I was kind of a jock playing baseball on a baseball scholarship. And when I decided I kind of got burned out, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So the one thing I realized is you should always listen to your mother. And so my mother said I should be an accountant. I said, well, that seems like a good career, not what I'm doing today, right? And so I kind of started to pursue this accounting thing. Early in life, my dad was a teacher, and he was kind of in the early to mid 80s, it was the teacher who supported the school system's computers. And so every summer he'd bring home this computer. So I was always interested in it. So I've always had a hobby in this. Now, what's interesting is, going back to the college thing is, I wanted to be an accountant, and about halfway through my accounting curriculum, I decided it was terrible. Like, this is the worst thing I could ever do, and realized I wasn't really good at it either. If you've ever had to do a T account and figure out your debits and credits, it's not super exciting. And so I kind of went back to the roots and started, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go see if I can get my computer science degree, and started taking C++ and some database courses. Now, granted, this was the late 90s, and decided that was for me, but I was too late, kind of in my curriculum. So I finished out my accounting degree, and then I joined Arthur Andersen, kind of in their audit practice. But they actually did a really good thing for me, is they maybe they were taking advantage of me either way. So I worked busy season with the financial auditors, using kind of my CPA and my credentials. And then during the kind of off season for the financial auditors, I worked the busy season for the technology people. When I joined Arthur Andersen, I had two jobs, and that was, they even called it computer risk management, which I always think is kind of funny. It dates me a little bit, but that was how I kind of got into it. And I've always felt, I think every technology person feels a little inadequate of their technology skills, especially, somebody has a CPA. And so I just learned and read every book I could possibly find, when Borders and Barnes and Nobles had the stores. Every weekend after I would travel on a project, I would come home, get a new book, and read it for the week. And I would do that over and over and over and over. And that's how I kind of got into doing security, 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You pretty much answered what would have been my next question, right? Is the imposter syndrome part of it. And you bring up reading books, right? And going through them just to learn more and learn as much as you can. And I remember, one of the very first jobs I had out of college, I was working with federal agencies. And I mean, they put you in the most difficult situations possible when you're on site, with the most intimidating people possible. You're talking about like someone that, like, you want to enable SE Linux. Oh, well, we have the guy that wrote SE Linux down the hall, and so like you can debate different topics and things like that, right? And I just remember, for going on site that very first day, I felt so inadequate, right? So like I shouldn't be here. What the hell am I doing? I'm just going to catch an early flight home. This isn't for me. I'll change careers. And I sucked it up and I went and got a book. I think it was like the Linux Bible or whatever it was, right? I started going through it. And, my first trip was pretty rough, right? My second trip was a little rough, a little bit better, still some room for improvement. And it got better the more I did it. And it's interesting, that you bring that up because I feel like most people nowadays, most people coming out of college, I guess, that are trying to get into these roles, they're more focused on knowing everything, right? Going into it. And it sounds like you and I relate on this. I mean, we knew maybe what 10-20% of what we actually had to know to get in. And it's like someone gives you a break, right? And it's like, okay, we'll take a risk on you, with this, and you take it and you grow with it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's like just-in-time knowledge. One of my favorite stories, I haven't thought about this in a long time, was I think I was 22, and they asked me to do an AS400 audit. And I'm like, what's an AS400, right? So, like, yeah, that's not something we learned in college, So, so I read the book, I read all the IBM manuals and did all the stuff and did this audit on them. And, in the middle of me reporting out this audit, I hoping this was going to be right. His name was Fletcher, and Fletcher looks at me and goes, "Son, how old are you?" I'm like, "Oh no, this is going to be a terrible, 22. He goes, "Shit, man, I've been in IT longer than you've been alive. What are you going to tell me that I don't already know?" And I'm like, "No, oh." And I just looked down at the site. I'm like, I appreciate it, sir, but I think I'm right here. And, you have to stick your ground. But it was one of those things that, it was good. It was one that you had to be prepared for everything you did. But I didn't know anything you could ask at that point, or web applications weren't even out back then. And so, to your point, the imposter syndrome is real. You can't know everything that there is to know. I think now that I've done this for a long time, same thing with you, you're going to ask the right questions. But there's always going to be somebody that knows something more about something than you do, but you have to be able to put it together. And I do think, I always go back. How did I go from an accountant to learning programming to growing up with computers to learning DNS, or I got Lang CSV. Why did I name Lang CSV? I've never been in MCSE because it was a learning track, right? I got it in NT in 2000. I got all my Cisco certifications just because it was a learning track. And at some point, it was read and then try to figure out a way to learn. All of these things that are very beneficial today. I'm glad I did it now or back then, because it'd be a lot harder. But I think you always have this imposter syndrome of how do you know these things. Now, there are things I know really well today. There's things I, reasonably well. There's things I can kind of guess at. It's a little bit like the Matrix. If you do this a long time, you kind of know that kind of connected to this. So, this operating system's like that, or this operating system's like that. You may see the wrong thing, but in general, it's about the same thing. But it is it's a steep market to get over. But once you kind of get to that peak, after 10 or 15 years, you have a pretty good idea of what's wrong pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I always start everyone off with figuring out how they learn. One of the best benefits that I got in my undergrad was just learning how I learned, what made sense, for my brain, for me to consume as much information as quickly as possible, right? And like to your point, asking the expert on site about the AS400, whatever solution it might be, right? But, when they're giving you the answers, you have to not just sit there, at least for me, right? I can't just sit there and just take it in. I need to, at a minimum, now that I've been in this thing for 10 years, right? I can at least think about the picture. But in the beginning, I had to draw out the picture. Like, hey, show me what this looks like. And it wasn't until I got the picture that I could actually understand, what was going on. And so it's critical for, you know, people getting started to ask those questions that they're probably even nervous to ask, right? Because you're like, you probably feel like you're almost insulting the expert, right? But at the same time, it's also very important to understand how you learn best so that you can take that response and really internalize it and move forward. And what you were saying with the certifications, that's something that is, I guess, hotly debated, in security and IT overall, right? Is do I need certifications? Can I get started without them? Whatever it might be. And I always tell people the certifications, they solidify your knowledge, right? So you can say, I've worked in cloud security, AWS is my primary cloud, right? You can say that, that's fine. But if you have the AWS security specialist certification where, 5% of AWS employees have this certification, it's not very, owned, I guess, in the community, right? Because it's such a difficult certification to get. You're immediately, you're taking that conversation from I understand AWS security to, well, yeah, no matter what we throw at this guy in our environment, he's going to understand how to do it. And you get that skill because you're able to, at least with these, higher level technical certs, you're able to dive into it at such a level to where it's like, no, I understand when I need to use a VPC endpoint versus a Bastion host. I know the benefits, I know the cons of it, right? And all these different ins and outs that, pay dividends in the long run. Did you think that as well when you were, maybe when you were going through it, or even when you look back on it now and you have that foundation?
I think, and I'll add one more. I think I've always thought about books, kind of certifications, and then kind of professional education. And so I think for the certifications, I didn't know I didn't know what to do. Like, what should I learn? Like, I see a lot of people coming out of college. Well, I want to be a pen tester. Well, what does that mean? Like, well, there's a pen testing school. I'm like, well, you need to know Linux, right? Like, well, they teach you Linux, then you don't know Linux. Like, you know how networks work and routers and switch. Like, it's gonna be real tough in those things. And so, my thing was there'd be a topic that I wanted to learn. Take something like DNS. I didn't understand DNS. Made a mind book. Okay, well, that's super dry. But I read it, or a lot of the certifications were I wanted to learn and master an operating system or networking, and so I kind of picked a topic and went through it, and I think that was very beneficial. And then it allowed me to say, oh well, they talk about IPsec. What is IPsec? Well, IPsec and VPNs, and how's a VPN work? And then I could kind of like start to focus on things, right? Well, what's a firewall do? And go read a firewall book, right? And I've listened to many of your podcasts, and people talk about they got their start from firewalls with one of the Fortinets or the Gauntlets or the Raptors, and IP tables, right? The thing I remember is Shorewall was the one that always helped me get IP tables to work on Linux, because IP tables was confusing back 25 years ago. And, it would give me a path. And the other one I think is interesting. And so, and I've always thought, I just finished my master's about 2 years ago in machine learning, and data science. And I did it because I thought I needed a bigger push on learning kind of the fundamentals. I thought AI back in 2019 would be important. I think I was right, but I spent 3 years doing it. But that was hardcore statistics. What's chi-squared? I forgot. I've heard chi-squared in 30 years, right? So and so I looked at it as I needed a professional education that was well equipped with connections, that I thought was super relevant. DNS is, you can read a book on DNS. You can't really read a book on neural networks. If you do, you can, but then you want to understand the statistics and the fundamentals, and it's Python, or you want PyTorch or TensorFlow, and what's a layer. And so that stuff gets complicated. I thought I needed the basics on it. And so I always think there's those three things. If you're looking for a point topic, a book's a great way. If there's a certification that can get you mastered in a core area, or professional education on something that has been very beneficial. And I think I kind of look at it as those three things. And then the last one I would say is like, take your own career into your own hands and try to manage it and apply those kind of three capabilities, or three levers you can do, and build yourself to what you want to be.
Yeah, that is a really fascinating way of putting it. I feel like people should use, formal education as that stepping stone to get into a new emerging area. I'll give you an example. Back in 2017, 2018, I graduated with my master's in cybersecurity, and I use that to catapult my career into cloud security, right? To build those bricks, I got different certifications. I read, more books that I can even remember on AWS and Azure and GCP. And so I have forgotten more about the cloud than I feel like I even know today, right? That's the situation. And now, fast forward, a couple of years, right? I'm getting my PhD in satellite security. Well, why am I doing that? It's because the next war that takes place is going to start in the satellites before it ever hits the ground or anything like that, right? And we need to have the capability to protect our communications against quantum computing algorithms and things of that nature, right? So it all starts and ends with the satellites, at least in my mind. So I'm stretching myself to get this PhD in an area that, even my chair, who's done this for 23 years now, he's like, hey, this will be a stretch. It's not going to be easy. This is going to be hard for you. Like, okay, well, I'm up for the task, right? And
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I think you're the same point. What you're doing there is something you believe that's important. And I think it's important in the future. Same thing with what I did with AI. Like, I just don't think I can teach this to myself. I need to be enriched in what it is, and be challenged. But I could read an article. I can do a certification. I didn't expect I was writing Python 3 hours a night. Right? We had a new kid, a new baby at the time, and I remember I would go lay down with him, and on my phone, I'd be reading, the textbooks while he was sleeping, so I could get him to go down. And so, it's a different rigor, right? It's commitment of 15 to 20 hours a week. For me, it was coding, which was nice for being in my role today. Just to sit there, put my headphones on, tune everything out of the world, and just write some crappy code. Because I'm not a real good coder. I'm a good data science coder, but I think in essence, it was a really good way to understand fundamentals. And just to your point, with what you're doing with your PhD, you're going to understand it very well. And when you hear people talk about it, you're like, it's not very accurate. And that's what I hear all the time with AI. I'm like, ooh, not sure AI is going to solve global warming, but there may be people that think it is. And so, I think it sounds like we're, kindred spirits.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Why don't we dive into what you're doing now? What's your role? Where are you at now?
Yeah, so I'm at Cloudflare. Cloudflare's a really cool place. Talk about Cloudflare. And I'm the chief security officer, and I also have the Cloud Force One threat intelligence team. So I moved over to GE about 6 months ago. And so kind of the CISO role is what you would expect it to be, protecting Cloudflare. So kind of the charter, protect Cloudflare, foster innovation. So working with the product teams, using all of our products, just providing feedback and then talking to customers. And so, having a pretty long, extensive CISO background, if I can help people, I'm kind of a free resource, which is kind of cool. And so that's been, it's been, that job alone is super cool. And, when you protect 20% of the internet and you see 209 billion attacks a day, you get attacked. We had our security incident in Code Red that we openly talked about. That's one of the things we do. We talk about everything, and that was really exciting to talk about because most people don't do it. And then I think the CloudForce One side, and so I have a group of analysts that are thinking, we have all this intelligence and threat intelligence and data. How do we use it for, how do we capture it for our telemetry? How do we use it for machine learning? How do we use it for research? How are we stopping attackers? And so, I think that's like, security person's, kid in a candy store.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I was actually just having a conversation about this with someone where I feel like with AI, we've kind of let the genie out of the bottle and the genie won't go back in. And I feel like we're opening ourselves up to so many different and brand new threats and attack vectors that we don't even know about. Like I'm working on several, side projects, and some of them are using ChatGPT. And ChatGPT just put NSA director on their board of directors. And it's like, okay, well, yes, this guy could be completely separated from the NSA, but I'm not an idiot. There's only so much that you're going to be separated from, right? So we have to protect our intellectual property from an AI algorithm that, could could literally just read what's on your screen and post it on the internet. Like I saw this yesterday, right? Where someone held up a sticky note with their Wi-Fi password, you know, uh,
Yeah, so how I got into this, it was when I was at McAfee and I ran the labs organization. At that point, McAfee it was when kind of the consolidated McAfee existed, and a billion sensors, and people are like, well, we just need to use machine learning and fix it. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, well, we just need to do a random forest on all of our data. And I'm like, I have no idea what a random forest on all our data means. And so that was kind of how I got into going down this path. And then I, left McAfee and joined a couple of banks. But I think to your point is, we don't always understand what the technology's doing. And we're going to, it's relevant. I always think what we're doing with LLMs is very simple. It's NLP, it's data protection. Don't let data leak to the internet. Like we've been talking about that for 20 years, and we just all have enabled a tool that is really good at it, right? And so I think to your point, you don't know what the data is, and so to your point on just if he goes on the internet, or the data is captured in an LLM, it's the same thing. Like I don't actually know what's in the LLM. Is it right? Is it accurate? Do I need an LLM to check the validity of my LLM? Right. So it's all of this stuff that's very interesting. Are they putting bad data in there so when people use it? And so I think we've entered a chasm that is dangerous. Like I think I'm super optimistic about AI, but it's I watch people on our workers platform. Workers AI is super cool, and you can go pull an LLM model down and run it. I'm like, that was way too easy. And then I'm like, well, what's in the model? Is there like a rootkit? Like, are they stealing my API keys from my Jupyter notebook? But then they just harvest the data off my machine? Like, whoa. And so I think those are things that, the technology is so cool and there's so many advantages of it, that it just is there. And I'll even say, like, I used it the other day, for a home project. I was like, I don't really want to code this API. I just put in like, hey, give me the code to hook in the API. It spits it out and I'm done. Right? That's super amazing progress for developers. That you guys go, what did that do? Right? And what is that data being used for? Right? So I think it's super interesting, and we're just in the early stages of AI because the LLMs don't actually know anything; they just assimilate words, right? We're not into inferring words or references at this point. That's a few years out, and that's where it'll get very interesting.
yeah, being at Cloudflare, especially, at the role that you're in, are you seeing AI change the kind of attacks that you are, protecting your customers against? And when you see if they are something like brand new, right, that wouldn't be possible or would be very difficult without AI, how are you able to quickly adapt, right?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I always smile when somebody asks, because like, how do I know that they're using AI to attack me? I think they're probably using very similar things that we're all using. Is they're trying to find ways to automate. And so what I've seen a lot is attackers are much quicker. They're building automation scripts. They're saying, hey, give me hey, be able to give me the code to pull down all of my customers from Active Directory, and they'll accumulate it. I think it's still probably in its infancy of AI, is what I will say. And I always think, well, what does AI mean? Are they trying to figure out what my algorithm is, what data sets I've put into it, what features I've extracted, what feature importance, and then they're going to manipulate the model? That very well could be true, but it's really hard to detect those things. I do know, some things that we've seen. I think we wrote a blog about Log4j, we saw Log4j early, before Log4j was Log4j. I wasn't here because we were able to source it back to the original developer that wrote it. But and I think that was a few months before it actually occurred. And so it's one of those that you actually, is interesting from a reporting standpoint of what is out there and how it's being used. And so I still think it's early, and still think that companies are still kind of learning about machine learning and algorithms, and things outside of logistic regression, they're starting getting boosting algorithms. I think it's going to be more important on how you can actually automate and get into things. And what I'll say, even our kind of the first reach we had this year with the Okta, that was 100% scripted. I mean, they were so fast, not having access to very long. They did a lot of reconnaissance. And so I might call that AI, but I also might call that really good intelligence, knowing exactly what they were doing. And so reconnaissance is probably intelligence as well, right? Like, what tools is company A using? And GPT will probably tell you. So it's a lot easier than having to scan and test and, be stealthy.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. There's a lot of things there that we could dive into. I feel like, with Log4j, how were you able to, and I'm not, expecting you to know this answer, but how were you able to I guess attribute, that code to the specific developer or the group or whatever it is? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think once you figure out what the attack looks like, I was talking to John Cummings, he was telling me the story. I wasn't here, but once you understand what the attack is, we have so much data, and we can replay the data, right? So you get 20% of the internet. So if we know actually what the attack is, we can actually go back in time through our telemetry and look to see where we first saw that, right? And I think this is what makes Cloudflare unique. This is one of the reasons I thought coming here would be amazing is, if we can do something like that, we're endless in the opportunities and technology that we have, especially with the platform that allows us to do it. So, you can actually, and I believe we worked with the government to help find attribution on the person. And so it's one that you can't, even if you attack a little small, tiny website, um, we have the logs, right? 20% of the internet is coming for us. We're going to see something. And so they're not going to launch, Log4j on a large banking institution for the first time. They're going to try, right? And they're going to try in a small website that's been hosted on GoDaddy or somebody like that. And because they don't want it to be caught. And so, we have little websites. We have, over 30 million internet properties. And so I think, it's a good place to test, and then we can go trace it back and say, well, what is the inception of this? And I think even in those things, we see, we do this actually, a lot, that, there might be a 0 day that somebody gets hit by, a company will call us, we can kind of trace it back and then put a signature in, because they're writing around email, right? So they can kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. It's either blocked or not blocked. It's pretty easy to know if you're blocked or not blocked. And so they have to try that somewhere. So if we can kind of go back and look at it and saying, kind of like a time machine, that's a really cool capability because of where we sit on the internet, and nobody can do that, right? And so, and that helps the platform, that helps the product, and that helps efficacy, right? Things that I think are super important on how do we do that. And, I just think that's really cool.
You know, I have, I guess, an interesting question, right? So you bring up that, you guys see 20% of the total traffic of the internet, which is, it's a really impressive number. It's it's a huge amount of traffic that you see, right? Just to even parse it and identify something wrong in that data is impressive alone, right? Is there ever maybe a internal discussion around like what a critical mass, traffic consumption would look like? And the reason why I ask is because, when companies start to, I guess potentially consume that much data of the internet or see that much, data of the internet, it could be like a single point of failure where if Cloudflare, let's say sees 51% of the internet and a hacker finds a way into Cloudflare that could, theoretically, right, put 51% of the internet at risk of something. Is there ever any talk about what that looks like? Because obviously, from a business perspective, you would want 100% of the internet. Obviously, like that's not a controversial thing at all, right? But, from a security perspective, it's like, well, what's the right amount that we should actually be at?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our view is the more data you can route through us, the more intelligence that we can give you. We'll never get to 100% of the internet. 20% of the internet took, Matthew and Michelle, 14, 15 years to build. And so, we'd love to double it probably and be able to provide telemetry. I think the network, the reason we have the network is because we have the websites that have the traffic that give us access to, carrier level grades, peering with ISPs and those things that none of our competitors have. So you could almost call us a global ISP, right? And so I think that's interesting. The one thing, I'll put my CISO hat on and say, from a strategy security standpoint, it, I think about things differently. So one of the things I'm talking about is how do we build immutable infrastructure, right? So, and because if I don't get there, then we could have a security issue. And so if I get to immutable infrastructure, and a lot of our infrastructure is already immutable, which really helped us kind of with the Thanksgiving incident, where everything's in memory, everything's encrypted. We do it every 30 days. We reload operating systems every 30 days. There are other things that we want to make sure we want to do consistently across the environment. But that allows me to have a trigger that in a breach, I can just start resetting things and evict in minutes. And I think this was something that Matt and I have talked a lot about, is how do we get to immutable? How do we only have signed things running here? How do we, everything's short-lived certificates. Everything is, hardened the way that it would be. You can't get in the cages that get turned off. And so that you have a lot of this in place today. But I think when you think about our place in critical infrastructure, that's what you have to expect out of us, right? And so, and I use this with a lot of CISOs and say, well, can you trust Cloudflare? I said, this is where we are. This is what I'm building. Can anybody do that? Right. And it's not me building, it's the engineering teams, right? It's how do we build backup control planes in every country? How do we have data sovereignty in every country? And so, that's not something, we talk about we're a security company. We talk about, hey, we're, the next artificial intelligence, company with all we do on the edge. We'll be the largest inference network in the world. But at the end of the day, we'll have 20+% of the internet coming through us. And the team takes it very serious about security and how we do things. Even, the Bastion Zero acquisition we just made of, hey, we got to improve how we do, privilege management, right? So, and that's, building good controls in those places, but it's how do we get this to, world class? And then we can have a conversation about, how we do security versus how our competitors do security. And we're not, they're going to be like, well, we're trying to harden Linux. No, I have the same version of Linux running on everything in the global network. And it's, everything's updated every 30 days to the latest. And then we have a vulnerability management program. It does that, right? I mean, that's just an amazing thing, but, with great power has great responsibility. And I think these are things that I think, to your point of, if we want 40% of the internet or, whatever that number is, or, get to 25% of the internet or 30% of the internet, is something that is good for the internet, we believe, because we're trying to help route mini ISPs. Because if you look at radar, there's a lot of, look at some of the elections, global networks are being turned off in certain countries, so you can't get the latest news on elections. And so we're trying to help, people be able to not do that. And that's the thing I always think, the mission of helping build a better internet. And we just did a pulse survey, kind of, the engagement scores, and more than 90% of everybody that said this is one of the single most important things in joining Cloudflare. And so I think you have this, we protect the internet, we defend the internet, we want an open internet, and with that comes, great security posture.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Um, that you're doing those things, that you're securing and hardening your network and your infrastructure that way. As a security, practitioner, I'm always thinking in terms of HA. What happens if I just pull that server, out of rotation, right? What if it just crashes right there? Are we dead in the water? Are we having massive issues, or am I not even waking up in the middle of the night because our HA is so good and so thoroughly tested? I always go back to one of the credit bureaus that I used to work for. Well, we had some of the most impressive HA that I've ever seen, for sure, where, we would have multiple data centers and 50% of it every other month would be literally powered off, like completely powered off, hard down. The main power switch is pulled, and we just see what happens, and in the very beginning, a lot of things were breaking, right, as expected. But over time, we built DHA to be so robust that we could lose, 75, 80% of the network, and we're still up, we're still making money. We may not be happy, but we're still able to operate, which is it's a significant feat to really, overcome, is having that ability to, harden your network to that degree. I mean, that takes years, of nonstop work and engineering and thinking through problems, forward and backwards and starting at the middle and going to the front. There's so many variables in there. So that is very impressive.
Yeah, and I think you have to do it right. I think, and you just have, I always think you need a cloud security person. I mean, the conversations I've had about how to build secure infrastructure in AWS, and like, what kind of use, cloud security controls? AWS is secure, and you're like, no, we're going the wrong way. And so, it's I think the start of this conversation, like, oh, we're just going to give you that. We're going to give you that infrastructure secure. We're going to do this securely, and right, like. I think it's one that, it's with where we are. The team, I can't take any credit for this. A lot of this has been built and just trying to push us over the edge to get to where we want to be. But what an amazing, organization to be thinking about this 10 years ago on how to build it. Doing, we're contributors to many of the kernels and Linux distros and Nginx and the things that we built, just to push the envelope for how we operate and to harden it. And it's really impressive to see, these people. And it's even better, you see them on Zoom and you see them on, these things, but to meet them in person, it's like, wow, I was in London and met one of kind of the top network people, and like, just as humble as he'd ever be. And he built a lot of the network, just really cool things.
Yeah, it's I guess my initial question, I guess it could trip some people up, right? But you provided, probably the perfect answer, right, to that question. That question wasn't meant to trip you up or anything like that, right? It's out of my own curiosity. But the only real answer is saying, yeah, if we're consuming a large portion of the internet, sure, I understand how your security brain is going to say, well, that's a risk because that's a single point of failure, and it's grilled into all of us to never have a single point of failure. But if you enhance the security so significantly, I mean, that's competing with, you know, government agency, data center like security and things like that, right? That is what that's that's actually competing, with. And it's really impressive whenever I see a private company, I mean, a public company, obviously, but you know what I'm saying. It's a company that isn't a government agency doing that level of work.
Yeah. And, I think this is something that, we talk about supply chain, and, everybody gets breached in the supply chain. And so, we, a lot of questions about what's your security posture. And I'm like, I'm happy to talk about it, right? But to challenge all of our competitors, challenge everybody in the industry, right? Like, I don't think there's any place I've ever been, probably no place you've ever been that you walked in like, what are we doing here? Like, whoa, like that's not what I thought, and I always use that. Well, we have a 3-year strategy. We have a 3-year strategy because we got 3 years worth of work to get us to be secure, which probably means we got more than 3 years. And I think these are things that when the vendors have to take this seriously. I've always been, I haven't spent a lot of time on the product side. I've spent time in big banking, right? And so expectation is that my vendors are resilient. They have good controls. But the reality is you take the large banking institution, probably the Fortune 50, they're probably in pretty good shape, but the rest of the world isn't. And we all know this, and that's why we see the supply chains, because it's a lot harder to attack Cloudflare than it is to attack one of our supply chains.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When more money is on the line, you get everything that you want, from a security perspective, right? And we always talk about that. I've been in the financial sector for security for far too long at this point, right? And we always talk about, there's certain things that you just spare no expense on, and you get it, you do it right. If it takes it longer, that's fine. All those sorts of things, but that is not widespread throughout the industry of, where security professionals need to be. That's not widespread throughout all the other sectors in the market. I wish I could say that, but I mean, I've seen some crazy environments that, in a PCI world that would never ever be acceptable. Like that whole team would be fired. It's it's
Yeah, and when I was at the big bank, I had $1 billion budget and 1,500 people that worked for me, and like there were two complaints. There were only two. We didn't have enough people. We didn't have enough money. And I thought, if we don't have enough people, enough money, and I have this, like we're all doomed, right? And so it's now a prioritization discussion because you can't. The banks can apply a lot of money to a lot of things, and they do a very good job at it. But if you're a medium-sized company and you got 10 security people, it's tough to run a 24-hour SOC, right? You got to outsource it and you have the right data, and so you go down this path, and it becomes very hard. And then you have vendors that are getting breached, and it just so you're like, well, being CISO is tough, yeah, because you're having to think about all these things. Then I got a 5-year-old waking me up in the middle of the night, right, screaming for daddy. It's usually screaming about me, but it's like you have all these things that you're trying to think of, and you're just getting kind of attacked from all angles, and you're just trying to put a finger in a nail.
Yeah, that's a good point. Where do you see this going, I guess, right? Where do you see the Cloudflare side of it going and evolving? What areas are you guys trying to get more penetration into in terms of security offering? And then how is that being informed by, potential threat actors that you're seeing in the environment that are switching their methods and, technology and things like that, right?
Yeah, I think, when people always, it's an interesting conversation. When I started about a year ago, people were interested in cloud. Like, we kind of would talk to Cloudflare, your CDN company. Um, and I think over the last 15 months, people are very intrigued. And so I think what we've done over that period of time, people are like, you guys are doing some interesting things, the zero trust and web firewalls and DDoS. And so, I think you're going to see more of that. I think, when I listen to Matthew and Michelle talk, the first 7 years were to build a network. And that's what they did. It's unmatched, and it's pretty well, you can't reproduce what we have. The second 7 years, we're building products. And I think we have some, I will challenge anybody to go to Cloudflare, sign up with a dash.cloudflare.com, log in, get a free account, set up WAF, move your DNS over. And if it's more than 20 minutes, to put a whole, like, I'd be surprised, right? And so the products have always been very good to use, but people haven't really known us. And I think, the cornerstone that we have, and it's, there's always that question of security versus performance that I've dealt with for a long time. And, our products are in the top 1 or 2 or 3 or 1, depending on who you like better, are top notch. But I always go back to, we're doing a lot with zero trust. We're doing a lot with your intelligence. We're doing a lot with web applications and APIs. And so you kind of have a fully redundant anycast network with all of these capabilities that's faster than everybody, because you just can't, you have 320 locations, and it will be 350 by the end of the year. We'll have GPUs in every location by the end of the year for kind of the workers and AI inference stuff that we do. And, if you want a VPN, I'm living in St. Louis. My VPN terminates in St. Louis, and then we optimize your route to wherever it goes. And all of my controls, every product we have runs in St. Louis. Every one of those 320 locations it runs. And so when you start thinking about resilience, and if St. Louis goes down, I go to Chicago, right? So I might go to Dallas or Indianapolis. And I think where I think this goes is, and you're starting to see it with, you need security, you need resilience, you need performance. And we're going to be more resilient and perform better than anybody just because of what we are. And that's kind of the cornerstone. And so I think the security platform on top is just amazing. If we talk about the telemetry we have, well, we have more telemetry than anybody in the world from a security standpoint. So we should have the best models. We should have the best data. And so I think, what kind of how we think about the next 7 years is we're going to be a very customer-driven organization. We've been kind of cool, fun, cool techies, and now you're going to see a really big and how we do things. You've seen it with, bringing Mark Anderson off of our board, amazing person. He was the CEO of a publicly held company. He's running revenue, and Stephanie Cohen, who was on the executive committee at Goldman. And so I think you're going to see this really big push. And I always wanted to work for that company that people were kind of scared of. I always worked for a company like, ooh, I got to worry about them. They're going to crush us. And so, like, I think we're that company now. We're the ones that people kind of look at over their shoulder and go, how are we going to compete with that global network and a VPN? I don't know why anybody would put another VPN other than us, because you look at the locations, we terminate in every one of the 320 locations, 320 data centers, right? And so I think you're going to see that become very prevalent and become kind of a marquee component. But I wouldn't, don't underestimate the AI. There's a lot of articles written. There's one written today about us and Apple, speculation. But I think you're going to see, to have the largest inference network in the world where we can run AI. I think people are still trying to figure out what AI is. How do we run models? When it comes that you want the model closest to the user, well, that's kind of our bread and butter. And so, the serverless compute platform that you can stream 50 million people if you want. If Taylor Swift decided she wanted to stream a concert, we can handle it. Like, that's kind of cool to be able to say that without knocking it over and distributing the networks. And so I think you're going to see the security really be dominant. I think you're going to see, AI over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. You'll see us play a huge role in what goes on globally.
Yeah, that is, it's interesting to see what you guys put together and put out, right? Because having that large of a network really enables you to, for instance, take zero trust to a level that no other provider out there probably could. Uh, another thing, I always forget that you provide zero trust. There's always something new that you guys are coming out with that is I feel like it's often a little bit overlooked even, right? And to your point of how quickly you can switch over to Cloudflare, you know, from a security engineer perspective, right? I worked for a company and we were deploying Cloudflare, and of course, we heard the same thing the entire time throughout the sales pitch. It's going to take you 20 minutes. It's pretty instant, pretty seamless. You're not going to have to, fiddle with it a whole bunch or anything like that. Whenever a company tells me that, okay, whatever, we go to deploy it, and just like you said, 15 minutes, it's technically deployed and everything. And my first question to the sales engineer that's helping me with it is, so what's next? What do I okay, well, we did this, that's fine. Well, what do we need to do now? And he goes, no, that's just about it. That's everything. Let it just do its thing. And I said, what? And I had to like check the availability of our applications, make sure that we weren't down. And I'm like, that might.
Yeah, I think it's one that's the origination of the company, right? Build the network, build products, make them easy. The only way to get 20% of the internet is to give free stuff away, and that's what we do, and you make it easy. And so I even get to the other conversation, when I talk to customers, I'm like, well, are you terraforming everything? Like, you should be terraforming and like put it in the pipeline, split out your roles and responsibilities, get out of click ops and roll. They look at you like I got two heads, and I'm like, how else are you going to do cloud security, right? Like, everybody's trying to put it in a pipeline. Like, just plug this in the pipeline, pull a configuration off, GitLab or GitHub or whatever source you like, and then make it sticky. And like, well, nowadays when we're seeing, there's always been the thing of, well, our security is better, and like, and everybody compares security. Like, we're top notch at this, but then operationally, like, you can move, right? So, you don't have to wait for 30 approvals. I can put it in the pipeline. You can actually do detections for, think about doing this stuff we do internally. We do detections off of our pipeline for people putting code in that they shouldn't, or unauthorized changes and all these things. I'm like, now you're actually getting into like, hey, this is real security stuff versus I gotta go to the user interface and add my DNS record. Like, I'm not like, it's all Sheffield, right? Get the application stuff, build it. And, you can see the look on people's face, like, how do you do that? And one of my other initiatives these internally is like get rid of click ops. So I'm like, we can't. How you shift left when everybody's clicking on everything, right? Like, it's terrible. Like I was saying, this issue on something today, and they're like, "Well, like the API is not good." I'm like, how? Like it's 2024. Like you should have APIs. You should have good Terraform providers. You should be able to write the code to be able to do the things because business wants to move fast. Security, we want to be an enabler, but we're often a distractor. And so, how do we move fast with all the things that are there? And so, this is one that we often talk about is you're going to get better security and it's going to get faster. I don't need to change a certain, security team doesn't need to get in the way of a certificate, let the dev team do it, right? So, what are those roles that you want to do? If you're going to push a code and it's just images, like, why do I need to be involved, right? So those things like free up time to do higher value things. I think, I do feel like there was, probably 20 years ago, there was a heavy, networks was more important than security. Probably over the last 20 years, security was more important. Maybe 10 years over security is important network. And now you're saying, everybody's working from home in different geolocations. It's about speed, performance, availability, and you gotta have security. And so I think these things are really interesting to the business model because it's all things we've always wanted to do. We just no vendor could ever help us. And that was, even when I came here, there were problems I had in the banking world that I'm like, why? I didn't know Cloudflare could do that. I didn't know I could consolidate 5 graphs into one and have this kind of performance or, zero trust. Why am I backhauling people to 15 data centers, with a zero trust provider versus if I'm in nowhere, my traffic terminates there, all my web traffic goes there, my CASB and the data protection is there versus backhauling them to Singapore, I think those are things that people are starting to put together with us, and it's super fascinating.
Yeah, Grant, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like we could, easily keep going for another couple hours, right? But, I tried to be very cognizant of, the time frame, right, that I give all my guests and everyone because everyone has such a busy schedule. But, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you if they wanted to reach out and, potentially connect? And in case they've been living under a rock for the past 10, 15 years, where can they find Cloudflare?
Yeah, so good. So, let's start with Cloudflare. So, go to cloudflare.com. If you're, this is what we see a lot is play with it, get an account, put up a website, put it on pages, develop your own site on pages and workers, protect it. Just see how easy it is and play with it. Pretty cool. And see what the product offering. You can even get a zero trust client for your home. So if you're one of those crazy people like probably you and I, and we have VPNs, we can do that free, right? There's free warp clients. We have our own kind of free version that's anonymous and surfing on the internet. So check us out. I think that's cool. Reaching me, I think best way LinkedIn, Grant Forzikas. Cloudflare is probably pretty easy. You can get Grant Peace, probably super simple. Love to hear from you. Love to connect. And if I can ever help with anybody, I think that's one of the best part about this job is I can, I'm kind of a free consultant to help and guide. And I find that highly rewarding.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thanks, Joe.